this every day, where you will hear everyday language such as 4-letter, 5-letter, or words that your mother might call profanity. Please be advised. I just think that when you have a preconceived notion about somebody, and then you get to know them really, and you listen to their story, and maybe one thing stands out to you as, yeah, like, I get that. That resonates with me. You have a connection. And when we build these connections with each other, regardless of what we look like on the outside or our socioeconomic statuses or whatever, when we just connect with each other on a human level, that's when healing comes, that's when joy comes, that's when we really start to feel it, the joy of living. So, you might not agree with everything you hear, and that's okay. Choose to be okay with not agreeing with everything that people are saying, and understand people don't always have to agree with you, and that's all right. We can all be loving and respectful of each other and respectful of our different opinions and still get along. It would be really boring if every single person in this world looked exactly like you and thought what you thought. It'd be really boring. So instead we have diversity, which is beautiful and interesting and something worth celebrating.
Because, like, I've seen other people that might not call themselves Christian, but they believe in a higher power, they believe in healing, or they believe in something that's they've seen, you know, whether you want to call it a miracle, whether you want to call it synchronicity, whether you want to call it, you know, coincidence, or you want to call it whatever you want to call it. I've seen them, and they don't call themselves Christian, but they believe in something. They have a belief that has created something for them. And so I'm like, if they don't call themselves Christian, and whatever the religion that they follow or whatever spirituality they have, and something has happened, who am I to judge what they believe?
So, okay. I know you had a change in your consciousness from maybe like a traditional Christian sort of understanding to, I don't know what you'd call it now.
Me neither. She's out here in the world. But yeah, but I've never believed the religious programming that I was brought up in. I was really defiant. I felt like if we were in church, I would have been the only one that raised my hand, like, excuse me, but I have questions, and like, shut up, you, like. And I would be sitting there while they would be reading the scriptures, and like I knew my Bible back to front, and I would be like, but why does God hate women? Like, or but why is God out here killing firstborns? Like, I thought God was a God of love. Like, who is this God? Like, he is angry. He's angry. He's mad. So when it came time for me to get baptized at the age of 13, I was like, yeah, no, I don't think I'm ready for that, you guys. Like, but can we read a few more books, and then, you know, maybe we can revisit this again, because I don't want to bring reproach upon, you know, God. And they were looking at me like, yo, this one is out of control. Like, she's so defiant. But my spirit just was like, it questioned it. Like, it had serious, deep, ingrained questions at 13 that I was like, that don't sound right. Which led me down a spiritual path. And then, actually, the first book that did it was The Game of Life and How to Play It. Because my one of my best friends at the time, she had a salon, and we had just opened the salon, and so for our 1-year anniversary, she gave us all gifts, and she gave me the book. And I had the book sitting on a nightstand, and it just so happened that I had got real sick. And because I was sick in the bed, I looked over on the nightstand and was like, oh, let me read this damn book. I ain't got nothing else to do. So I read the book, life-changing. Like, I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. Like, these are concepts I have never heard of before. This is great. And so then I read that, which led me to a book called The Secret. So I was doing clients' hair at the house, and two of my, like, really good clients came. They're husband and wife, and they're like, oh my God, I gotta tell you about this book that we read. It's Like Attract Like. And I'm like, what is wrong with these two? Like, at the time, I was not as bubbly as I am now. I was like, why are these niggas so happy? Like, what is wrong with you two? Like, they came in, like, bouncing on air, and I'm like, something's wrong with them. Like, so, and they're explaining the book to me, like, yeah, it's about like attracts like. And I'm like, yeah, that makes no sense whatsoever, but okay. So, same day, my cousin from South Carolina calls me, girl, you're not going to believe this. I'm here talking to she's talking to one of her friends, and she was like, he's telling me about this book. And I was like, what's the book? And she was like, some book called The Secret. And I said, like, even at the time, like, now I know about synchronicity. At the time, I still knew, one book came to me twice in one day. So I was like, all right, I'll humor this. Let me read the book.
Yeah, I mean, like, for me, I know that my first one was The Way Out. Mm-hmm. And then...
that was your first book?
Yeah.
What?
It was, yeah. The Way Out was my first book. I probably spent a lot of time on that one. But I found The Way Out, and then one day I remember I went to salon, and you were talking to somebody else, and you were saying to them, hey, you need to read The Game of Life and How to Play It, the love chapter. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why, but in my spirit I was like...
I need to read that too.
Yes. I just felt that way. I just did. And then, like, I wrote it down on my little thing, and then I think later on... we had started talking, and then that's when you had mentioned to me about The Power of Now. Mm-hmm. And similar to your story, I had just found that book the day before, and so, like, I think then I thought to myself, oh, I'm going to read this other one first. And I liked The Game of Life and How to Play It a lot. I did think there was a little bit of a stumbling block for the duality for me.
In what way?
Well, just the idea of, like, it took me a long time to... It took me a long time to reconcile, like, there is no evil. Mm-hmm.
That's hard for a lot of people to swallow.
Yeah, especially, like...
Because the 3D is showing you reality. Like, clearly, that nigga's evil. Like,
right,
No.
Exactly, and then you have to, like, kind of, like, process, like, past trauma and all that stuff, right? And then you think, well, like, this person, it has to... Like, you're going to tell me that they did X, Y, and Z to me, and they're not evil, and that's God? It's hard... I wouldn't say it's hard. I'll take that back. It's something I have to be conscious of and recognize always in other people that it's not...
But what did Jesus say? Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do.
So you don't feel people should be punished for their sin?
No.
Or anything like that?
Why would we do that? They punish themselves. Everybody punishes themselves. You don't need to punish anybody. Like, doesn't God say... vengeance is mine? Not because God is out here smiting people, but because you are God made visible. You are a law unto yourself. So if you're out here being shitty as hell, you're going to run into other shitty individuals who are going to give it right back to you until you come to the realization of understanding, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe it's me thinking crazy thoughts, and then I run into the crazy situations. So, but it's not until you actually have something, like for most people, they have to run into a brick wall before they realize, maybe I shouldn't do it that way. And then, like, once you become like me and you have a running long note in your phone of, I said this, that happened. I did this, this happened. I prayed for a blessing, this happened. Like, and it's a long, like, you've built up your faith enough to know, like, because even to this day, I know I can think something crazy and have a horrible day. Like, if I start off on some, really ugly, disgruntled mood, it's not going to go right. And it's, once you have this spiritual knowledge, you're held responsible. Like, you are, because you know better. And once you know better, you do better. But not just because, I'm holier than thou. No, but because I know my energy reflects right back to me. So if I'm out here cutting up in the world, I'm going to run into a whole bunch of situations that cause and feed that same frequency.
Okay. So we connected and we started talking about the labradorite that you're wearing and about divine synchronicities.
Yeah.
And how like there's nothing random.
No.
Right?
Nothing.
And then I heard you just now and you were talking about TikTok and you were kind of talking about chakras and about the things. So it's like, where are you at, like, spiritually? Like how do you feel, like, what's your conviction? Whole thing?
The faith, okay, so the thing is, growing up, I wasn't, my parents grew up in a Pentecostal church. They were very religious. My mom had very long hair. You know, the Pentecostal church is like the women can't wear any pants because that's the men's, clothing and all the stuff. And she couldn't shave her legs. Like, it was very extreme. They were very extreme when it came to their faith and like the physical part of. So they were very, very like, strict and and very, when they were young, they were just. But once they got married, my mom cut her hair. She had very short hair. She dyed her hair. You couldn't dye your hair back then, so she dyed her hair. She would wear earrings. Like she was wearing like pantsuits to go to like school, like
handbasket.
So yeah, so like she just complete flip when she got married to my dad. Like they both were not going to church. They didn't take us to church when we were growing up. They were making really good money. My mom was a teacher. My dad was like, a mechanical engineer working for this oil company. They were just, we had a good life when I was growing up as a kid. My dad built the house himself, literally. And my dad, okay, so just to put a mental picture, like we weren't poor. We weren't rich, we weren't poor. Like our house had, the garage itself could hold 6 cars.
Whoa.
That was a huge house. 3 cars. You could fit 3 cars comfortably on each side of the house.
Whoa.
Underneath the house. 3 cars. So
That's
6 cars.
amazing.
It's a massive house. And, back in the day when I was growing up, we had carpet in our living room, which was super bougie for Puerto Rico. That's like, we had a carpet in our, so like I didn't grow up poor. We had a nanny. The nanny took care of us. She cooked for us. She cleaned the house. So we had a nanny / housekeeper. Like, so I didn't grow up poor. Back then, it's just like they were living the life, so they didn't go to church. They didn't take us to church. It wasn't, like, well, we have to go to church. We have to believe in Jesus and do all this stuff. And they were just living a good life, and they were giving us a good life. So I never grew up going to church. Maybe I want to say 3-4 times to church. Maybe 3-4 times, maybe 5, maybe a handful of times. I want to say a handful of times I went to church.
Sorry, in your whole life, for example, in your childhood, or like a year?
In my childhood.
Like
a handful of times.
There's really not a lot.
Yeah, so not a lot.
Wow. Okay. All
so
right.
even though my parents grew up in church, I went a handful of times to church.
Okay.
So at 10 years old, when my grandma took me to church, the music is going and like they're singing all these songs that are lively, and Puerto Ricans, obviously it's like Spanish rhythm, and they're like singing and like they're singing and it's all this stuff. And so I'm singing, I don't know the words, but so like there's lively music and they're singing, and then the song is like fast and like all the stuff, and it sounds like there's joy in the song, right? So there's joy in the praise and the worship that they're singing, and I'm 10 years old singing in church and just clapping like, okay, and I'm clapping and like they're singing, and all of a sudden as I'm clapping in church and just seeing people like their joy and they're singing and whatever, I start feeling this warmth around my body, and all of a sudden I start crying, and I'm clapping and I'm trying to like clap and like sing at the same time, but I'm clapping and crying, and it went from crying to sobbing. But I wasn't sobbing because I was sad. I was sobbing because I didn't know what was going on with me. I was just like sobbing with like joy, but at the same time I didn't know what was happening to me. And I knew then it was the Holy Spirit that was poured, like the Holy Spirit was pouring on me at 10 years old, and I was just clapping and I'm just crying uncontrollably. Like I didn't know what was going on. I had no idea what was going on when I was 10. But it was the Holy Spirit that was on me when I was 10. Sort of like securing me, like, you're mine. You're mine, and you won't know what's going to happen, but you're mine. And it was just like, boof, literally sealed. Like, something is going to, like, you have a calling on you. Like, boom.
And that was you. You knew, like...
Yeah.
So then from there, did you want to go to church? Like, did you go with your grandma? Or, like, were you just, like...
No,
oblivious almost for years or something?
That was just an experience that I had. And I never shared it with my parents. I never was like, oh, I was crying in church. Because I was 10.
Yeah.
So I wasn't going to just go to my parents and be like, I was crying in church and I don't know what I was crying for. And it was like, I just, some kids do that, right?
Yeah.
Some kids like, I was crying. I don't know, I was crying in church, Mom. I was like, I don't want to go to church again because I was crying. And so they would say something, but I never said anything to them. It was just, it happened to me, and then I never said anything.
So then did you start going to church in Florida?
Yeah.
And were your parents going?
My parents made us go. They
Whoa,
made us
what
go.
happened? Okay.
What
happened?
From them not ever telling us about church they made us go to church. They're like, nope, you're going to church. We're going to start going to church. You're all going to church. And They just, I think it was born out of, and this is the thing. This is the thing about when things go right and you're making money, you're in a good place, whatever. Some people don't see the need to seek God because they're, I'm fine. I got money. I got my house, whatever. That's where we were. We had a great life in Puerto Rico. We did. So, like, once we moved to Florida, they had to really work hard. My dad had to really go from being a mechanical engineer to, like, when he first moved to Florida, he had to, like, freaking work at Denny's trying to, like, put food together in the kitchen and set himself up before we went to Florida so that he can have a place for us to live and all this stuff. And there was a lot of sacrifices, and they did all this stuff, and and my mom had to look for jobs as a teacher and do all this stuff and go around and looking for a bunch of jobs and do, a lot of sacrifice. We went from a great life to being a very sacrificed life. And so, of course, we have to depend on God, right?
I get it.
That's when you have to depend on. So then it's like, nope, we're going to teach about you need to go to church and that. Years, she did.
So then, like, how did you get... Like, how did you get to the place you are now? And I suppose, like, where are you now, like, spiritually?
So, like, the place that I am now, I want to say that, it took me a long journey because, like, being in the church, I sort of experienced a little bit of what my mom and my dad went through. This whole strictness of like, oh, you can't do this, and like there was a lot of no's. Like, you can't do this because you're not spiritual if you do it. You can't do that because you're violating God's word. It's like, okay, like what? Anyway, I don't want to get started into like how people use scripture as a machine gun, but they do. It's like it's crazy, but. I went from there to a place of embrace for humanity, I think. Going through my own... I think what started me on a journey to really believe what I wanted to believe is when I moved out on my own. Like when I went to move out on my own and had to pay bills and had to go through scenarios that I didn't depend on my parents, and I had to make friends, and I had to do things on my own and be a human being and have friends and lose friends and, have agreements, have disagreements, have all these things and figure out life on my own is when spirituality, faith started making sense. And I had to make decisions on my own, honestly. But I think the place that I am now, if I was to like go from those things that I went through church to now, I think I've seen where prayer works, but I've also seen where belief, whether it's my same belief or not, works.
Okay, I wanted to ask you that.
Because like I've seen other people that might not call themselves Christian, but they believe in a higher power, they believe in healing, or they believe in something that's they've seen, you know, whether you want to call it miracle, whether you want to call it synchronicity, whether you want to call it, you know, coincidence, or you want to call it whatever you want to call it. It's I've seen them, and they don't call themselves Christian, but they believe in something. They have a belief that has created something for them. And so I'm like, if they don't call themselves Christian, and whatever the religion that they follow or whatever spirituality they have, and something has happened, who am I to judge what they believe in? And that's where I'm at now. It's like, it's hard for me to point a finger on, ooh, you're Buddhist? What? Ooh, that's not the right religion. What are you talking about? Like, you have to light incense and do all that stuff and follow Buddha and other. Okay, so do you. I'm at a place, oh yeah, he was cute. It's a cute little belly man. All that stuff. You know, and like a lot of the beliefs, oh, I like it. It's that he was a happy man. And it's just like, you know, and so I don't judge it, because like a lot of people that are Buddhists that I know they follow their religion to the T, and they practice, and they have a lot of conscious, intentional behaviors to like really align with Buddhism and all this stuff. And it's like, I haven't seen some Christians that align with the first page of Genesis. I mean, so it's like, so like to me, like where I'm at now, it's like I've lived my own life and seen other people and seen other beliefs, and it's all about your, okay, so I'll tell you this. To sum it up, I think, the letter R is, has, I think, the wrong word behind it, because religion sort of divides humanity, where relationship really makes spirituality the actual religion you need to have, which is not really, yes, God exists. Yes, we know Jesus is, you know, came to provide salvation through the manifestation of a body of God, right? That's what we believe in. But relationship, no matter how you either call yourself a Christian, Buddhist, whatever, the relationship you have with your belief is what really drives.
Yes.
Right?
I so agree with you.
Yeah, because
yes.
religion is really, if you think about it, religion with the letter R is man-made, you know, multitude of scenarios of what can happen, not, or would happen, I guess, like coulda, shoulda, wouldas of humanity. That's what religion does, right? It just tells you these are the coulda, shoulda, wouldas of your spirituality. That's what religion does. That's really what it does. However, you can tell when someone that is practicing any of those religions has a relationship, not following the religion. Because a lot of people that say, oh, I'm Catholic. Okay, great, good for you. I've met some great Catholic people that demonstrate the behavior of the most spiritual, most wholesome spiritual person that I've met in my life. And they're Catholic. Just because they, you know, the Virgin Mary and all the stuff and the saints and all that. Okay, great, good. That works for you, great. I'm not against it, or I'm not against anybody that follows Buddha and does all the stuff. Like, I choose to believe my belief because I've had an experience and I've had a relationship with what I believe and who I believe in.
That sense of urgency to a lot of these things, and so that doesn't always precipitate an urgent response for me, but you know, it's like everyone probably, like you would imagine, you get into these rhythms of you're going and then you're slowing down, and I think that's important too, is knowing like your rhythm in terms of going out and doing the things that you're called to do, but then being able to pull back and reconnect.
Yeah, recharge as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a big one. Hopefully that was an answer.
Well, it did, because it led me to another question. I want to ask you, like, your answer was basically, it reminded me of his Bible verse. It was like, how can we do what God wants us to do? And calling out to Jesus, like, and so then obviously it's faith, and it was something that I don't know why, but I mean, I know why, but I felt led to ask you was, about faith. And so maybe if you can speak to me, but obviously, like, also understanding, like, speaking to people who maybe they've been hurt by the church, right? Or maybe they've had people tell them, like, oh, we don't, accept you, or whatever, like, tell me why that's so important to you, as it stands today, like, who we meet, like, who is David, and why is faith important to you? Like, what is it, like, what is it that made that be your answer? What's my purpose in life? To do what God wants.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Like, what is it, what is this thing, like, did something happen? Was there a path? Was, like, what is it that makes you say, like, yeah, okay, my purpose is to, do what maybe some people call, like you said, the ghost. You can't see it, you can't touch it, like this untangible thing that I'm going to follow, and I'm going to do what God said to do, like, why?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I think to answer that, probably I'll have to give a little bit more of my story, a little bit more of my history.
I'm here for it.
So, I grew up in Florida, Tampa, Florida, many years ago. I'm 54 right now, and so I would say I kind of had a pretty normal upbringing in terms of, we would, small town with mom, dad, brother, and sister lived with us at the time, kind of a nuclear family. But then, we had challenges like everyone else, and eventually my parents the cracks started showing in their relationship as I kind of grew older, probably in my early childhood. And so I think even though we would go to church on the weekends, I would say I would kind of call it more of a nominal type relationship with God at that point. I mean, I think for me it was Sunday school, hanging out with friends, in the back of whatever, right?
Yeah, I don't get it.
Yeah. Probably not uncommon for youth to grow up like that. But I'd say as I kind of grew older, and I eventually started to explore my teens and early 20s, just kind of growing up, I didn't really pursue any of that. So I guess when I say it hasn't really always been an imprint in me, it was really something that came later in life. And so I was kind of just really doing my own thing early, again, teens and 20s, and eventually got off to college where I started doing studying computer science, and so I do IT for my job. No, it's interesting perhaps to you maybe that I didn't mention my career as part of my purpose. I would say it's probably woven in there a little bit, but very small for me. Hopefully, yeah. So back to the story. So as I was kind of growing more and more, I think what I had found based on everything with my parents' divorce and just stuff that had happened to me as a youth, again, more of the cracks started showing a little bit, and things aren't just, all rosy and, peachy and that kind of thing. And so working through those things, I think I tried to seek out relationships, women start to seek out female relationships in my life to kind of, I would say, maybe nurse some of those wounds, if I could call it that.
Yeah, for sure.
Probably some separation stuff that happened with mom growing up. And so, yeah, got married pretty early in life. In my mid-20s, I met this gal at work, and we hit it off, and I think at the end of the day, I was looking for someone to help. I don't want to say help complete me, but it was really more of, this was a person that I felt like I just couldn't live without. And whether I was really in love with her at the time kind of remains to be seen, I think. Yeah. So, but love is a tricky thing, obviously. Not that I'm an expert. But I bring all that up to say there was kind of a pattern in my life for me to try and seek out these other things to heal that wound that had been created early on. And so as the pattern started to continue, we got divorced later in I think this was in my 20s, late 20s, early 30s, and met my then second wife. And so this was the start of where I would really start to look in other directions and other places for my faith journey was taking me in a different direction, I think, finally. And so it was kind of ironic because she led me to a church that I started going to, I think it was like 32, something like that. And this was actually Buckhead Church. It's like a subsidiary of North Point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Pretty big mega church. And so that ended up becoming my kind of home for about the next, 10 years or so.
Okay.
So that's kind of where I grew up and where I would say I got connected with God and really just sort of expanded my faith and really kind of grew it at that point. So this is maybe 33. Feel free to.
I was gonna ask you if you don't mind. Yeah. So like, obviously, you had your typical kind of good times at youth group experience is what it sounded like,
Yeah.
and you weren't one of the kids at the front, throwing yourself down. You were kind of in the back hanging out with your friends, having a good time, is what it sounded like, right?
Right. Yeah.
So then, obviously then you get to the point where you're in your 30s, you're with your second wife, you guys land at church. And is it now that you're recognizing that you need something more than her, or was it something that happened at the church that made you say that you wanted to go back and that you wanted to keep going back and that this was going to be a thing in your life? Or, what was it?
Yeah. I'd say looking back now, I would answer that to say God had been sort of guiding me the whole way, or kind of leading me in this direction for some time. But I would later say in my baptismal kind of, they call it the, I guess, testimony, I would say later I was sort of like Jonah, lessons from the man that ran. And so yeah, and ironically that was one of the first messages I heard when I went to this church, North Point Church, was so it really spoke to me.
Whoa.
Yeah, and I was just like,
Synchronicities.
total synchronicity. I was running the opposite way, he was chasing me, and I think it was really through the message that was communicated through several, probably over the course of that year. It's 33, probably, I think it was in the spring. I'd heard several messages, but that was the first one, and so that really captivated me and made me think, okay, there's something to this. I'm going to keep coming back. And the messages were very compelling too, with this particular church, and so that really led me to, one day I was kind of listening to one of those messages, and I think the message for me was the overwhelming grace and love and mercy of God kind of just showered on me at that moment. And I would say that's when I kind of had a saving grace moment with God. And so this was, it was a little over 20 years ago. So it's kind of for me, I call it kind of it's my
Jesus moment.
Yeah, that's right. But the 20-year anniversary, if you will.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah.
Yeah. It was kind of just last year, but it was definitely a moment like no other that I can remember. It's just very overwhelming, emotional, and just a cleansing. I would call it that. At the end of the day, at the end of that experience, very cleansed. And so for me, that was kind of the longer version of how I got that faith journey started. And I say from that point on, I lived a perfect life. I never had any issues. I never had yeah. You knew that was
That's
coming.
hilarious.
Yeah.
You're actually funny, dude.
Yeah.
That's actually hilarious.
Yeah, I think some people, not many, actually believe that, but before they get into it. But
then things got more difficult.
that's right.
That's what happened.
That's right. And things got interesting.
Yes.
Because I had still, I wouldn't say it was like 100% healed, of everything. You're still walking out sort of this, call it like you still have this flesh bag that you're kind of walking around with, and so but for me, I feel like there was a new spiritual component that was kind of like birthed inside me, and so just kind of chasing that for the next, I guess now 20 plus years, growing that, it's kind of been, an up and down type of roller coaster affair, and obviously mistakes made, but also him just continually implanting new ideas and new faith in me to be able to do new things, like these different missional journeys, if you want to call them. Some are more broad, some here local, and then I think the ministry part was really just an extension of what he was calling me to do, and I think gifting me, because for me, I really come alive when I have these podcast interviews, or even just, sometimes we'll do the podcast, sometimes we'll do, depends on what the person wants. They may not be interested in that
conversations.
Part. Yeah. But just being able to have the conversation and not only connect with the person, but kind of just to be able to share exactly what God's done for me and through me is a privilege for one thing, but also just personally, again, not everybody has this level of, I think, enthusiasm or charisma about, talking to people about faith and God, but I do, and so that's why I continue to keep doing that.
I love that. I wanna ask you, I found it interesting that you mentioned a few things when you were telling me your story, because I felt compelled to ask you about faith, and then you kind of proceeded to tell me a little bit about your history, right? And then you kind of shared a bit about what a lot of people would call trauma, right? And then later you mentioned, healing, basically like a mental, dare I say, like healing of that trauma. And that's something that's actually come up in a lot of these conversations that I've been having with people, where I'm starting to realize, big or small, like we've all been through something that has been very traumatizing.
And the thing is, like, every person has their own individual traumas, right? So some people go through sexual trauma, some people go through, verbal abuse, verbal trauma, they go through, self-esteem trauma, where like they have a parent or people that are older, or family members where they abuse them and, put their self-esteem down, and they have issues with that. Some people go through body issues that when they're, big, kids actually do have, there's children that are not fed properly, where they gain so much weight that they're really, really obese for their age, and so that becomes a trauma itself. And then later on in life, so there's so many layers of trauma for every person, and so for me, the recently, I had a friend that she was a godsend, because I've not gone through a therapist, and I think I suggest people do go to a therapist to do what I did with my friend. Which was to go through my timeline. I literally said what I told you just now. My first memory was at 3 years old. that's how I got started. And I told my friend, here's the first memory of 3 years old. And then I said, okay, please allow me to continue from 3 years old on. And I went from 3 years old to 6 years old, when shared the memory, to 8 years old, to like all these memories that I had as a child. And then that light bulb went on, and I was like, oh crap, I didn't know how much trauma I had as a child. That is a lot of my reactions, the way that I behave, the way that I interact with people, have a lot to deal with those traumas that I had. And it was a godsend to me. For me to really lay out my timeline with a friend, to say, oh crap, I've never unfolded this and unpacked this, a suitcase of memories that I just put in a suitcase and forgot about it. And so like I never really went through it. So the way for me to deal with my emotional intelligence was to learn from those things that happened to me. So some things happen to you and some things happen for you, and that's the difference that sometimes people need to think. When something happens to you, sometimes you have to be careful how you perceive whether you're a victim or whether there was a lesson. And so sometimes there's a lesson, sometimes you're a victim. Sadly, when it happens for you, that means you were destined for that thing happening to you, because you will later use that or learn from to use in your life.
Now, do you really think, I'm going to kind of go with maybe a sort of a Christian a mindset with it, right? Where you have like, all things work together for your good, Romans 8:28, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that you can ever be a victim in that like way,
Well, that's the thing. Like, and the reason why I'm very broad and paint the entire humanity with one brush is because we're all I don't want to say victims, but we all go through some type of trauma in our lives. Even as the most perfect that people can paint one person to be, whether you come from a wealthy family or a poor family or whatever, every single human being has some type of trauma. Some. So, can we be victims? Maybe, depending on the situation. If you're, like, for example, if you're a child that has no control of rape or, mental abuse, physical abuse, whatever the case is, I can consider that you are a victim of another person controlling the situation. Because you have no control of it, so as a child, all of us are victims of something at some point. Because as a child, you're pure, you don't have control of certain things, so you could be a victim. Some people are more victims of some things in a bigger scale than others. But I think, like I said, everybody has some trauma. So at some point in your childhood, every single adult, they have to sit and think, what was my trauma when I was, what's the trauma that what trauma did I suffer?
Okay, so you sat with it, with your friend, and you went through your timeline, and you kind of identified your trauma, for example, right?
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
Then what?
It was a lot to unpack. In some of the memories that I shared with my friend, I triggered her memories of her own traumas. She started crying, and I thought that I was the only person that went through what I went through. Your story is so similar to mine. I triggered her because she went through a lot of things that I went through as a child. And she started crying. She was grateful that I shared my story. And so I think after I went through my timeline, then it was just like, I asked myself what I do with it. First of all, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
Same as like, now what?
Yeah.
Second of all, a lot of things in my life started making sense. Because I went through my time and I said, oh, that's why this, like, a lot of light bulbs started going off after I went through and literally just scrubbed through all those memories that I've just never really bothered to think about. And a lot of lights started turning on and it's like, oh, crap. And it was literally like, it's weird to say, but it's like teleporting back into being 3 again. And coming back to my age, and then teleporting back to age 10, and then coming back, and then it was just like a lot of these memories took me back and forth with conversations and scenarios and things that happened to me as an adult, even as a teenager or as a 20-some-year-old, or as a growing adult. There were certain memories that I was like, that's why I acted this way on this date, when this happened, because, and then zip, put me back at 10. Does that make sense?
Yeah, things started to make sense. You started to be able to make sense of your thinking and your thinking patterns because of the things that had happened to you or that you went through.
Right. So then it was just like, wow, I wish everybody could go through this process. So then they can realize there's nothing wrong with you, and there's, you are the way you are, and it's like, because of, and then roll out.
I love that.
Roll the tape.
But just having that inquiring mind is enough it will start to reflect back to you things like a book will come to you, or somebody will say something, or a movie, or something will happen that will start to guide you down the path of you getting the answers that you're seeking. And it's going to all lead to the exact same answers of oneness. All of them.
What do you mean? Oneness?
Because if God is the underlying principle or awareness or consciousness, which is you, the substance of all, it's always guiding us back to itself, like to the point of singularity. Always, no matter what path you're on, whether it's scientific, religious, it's all bringing you back to the one consciousness, to one. And when you get there, you're like, oh, I see now.
Yeah. I love the way you explained it. I hadn't quite had the words, but I do feel that strongly. Like, sometimes people will argue over, like, religion and theology and all the rest of it,
It's all the same.
And I just, each
So,
time.
and most of the religions are teaching the same thing.
Legitimately.
Because I've read plenty of the books, and I'm like, it's the same thing that says in this one over here. And then Krishna and Jesus and Buddha and the greats, spiritual masters, they're all saying fundamentally the same thing. Love. You are love, be loving. That's it.
Ask and you shall receive, right?
Yeah.
What are we asking for?
Just ask for the truth of reality to be revealed to you. If you have a burning desire to actually know, or you want a different path in life, or just to know, you've got to ask first. So just ask, like, is this true? What is the truth of this reality? And what steps do I need to take to open my consciousness up more? And it will be revealed in a way that's unique and personal to you, because the infinite spirit knows exactly how to reach you in your heart and will guide you in a miraculous way. And then who knows how many months from now or a year from now, you'll be like, look where it led me. Like, this is fascinating. Didn't see any of this coming about. But it's magical, because I didn't see any of the things coming about for me. If somebody would have told me like 15 years ago, like, you're going to be super spiritual, I'd been like, life is a bitch, okay? Nobody cares about any of that stuff. Like, this is real. This is hard. And now I'm like, nah, just nothing. It's fine. It's all fine. It's gonna work out, I promise. It's gonna be okay.
Well, and like you were saying earlier, which I loved, I don't know, we started our conversation on it, and there's nothing to fix.
There's nothing to fix. And especially once you get to that concept and you really understand, like, there's nothing broken. You're not broken. You've never been broken. God is not broken. So God does not need you to help God get God's shit together. So you just need to accept omnipresent perfection. Like, I am perfect. The person I'm looking at is perfect. The situation is perfect. Everything's unfolding perfectly. And once you set those into motion by firmly fixing them, not because you're trying to make it happen, but because you really believe in your consciousness, like, I'm good. Everything's fine. I am a perfect being. Not because I, Tanji Dark, am perfect. No, I am the I am presence. It is me. It's manifesting itself as me. Like the sun in its rays. The ray is a part of the sun, but it's a part of the sun. Like it doesn't run around like I am the sun. Like it's the sun, but it's not the sun's sun. It's a ray, right? And that's the same thing with us. Like, you are a divine aspect of the whole. Like, it's a whole, and it's omnipresent, and it's complete in every aspect, but it's still bigger than you.
So you're not saying, I am the sun, I am God in that sense. You're saying, I am the rays, I am of the sun, I am the effect of the sun.
Yeah, I am the sun.
Made visible.
I am divine aspect of the sun.
The expression.
Yeah.
The expression of
the visible expression of God. Like, I'm God made visible. And on the graph, it shows you, literally, mathematically, from the atom to the universe, you are the point where it says, hello, I'm a person.
Yeah, you know, and I would honestly say to you, like, it reminds me of a conversation I was having with David the other day, and it's like, I like the word you used, what did you call it? Synchronicity.
Mm-hmm.
Divine synchronicity, where things will just start to fall into place to the point where that's how, like, that is God on the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, sometimes, like, you know, people will say, like, oh, I'm waiting for God to save me, or
mm-hmm.
whatever, and it's like you, Tanji, are God. Like, you know,
yeah.
There's been times where, like, you've been God to me, and I've been God to other people,
mm-hmm.
and, like, we're, you know, like, that's how, like, God works.
Yeah, it's a feedback loop.
You know, dare I say,
mm-hmm.
you know?
But you're always it. But that's the only thing that it requires, is to be still and know I am God. That's it. Like, you've got one job. Understand that everything that you yourself, your consciousness, is God looking out at itself. So I am perfection looking out at perfection. That's all it requires for the perfection to manifest and to start to reflect it back to you. Because once again, you set it in motion. The same way that I could say, I'm a horrible human. I am a horrible person. I'm bad. Because there are people that believe that about themselves, and they have those experiences, which constantly feed it back. But they could jump off that train at any time if they would just say, I don't want to play this game anymore. But they have every right to play it. That's why, judge not by appearances. Leave them alone. If that's the game that they're playing, you don't know what path they're on. You're supposed to worry about you and your consciousness and how you see the world.
Yeah. You can't go taking the speck out of everybody else's eye when you got the speck
when you have a big mote in yours.
Yeah, legitimately.
There's a scripture, you think that it was you that chose me, where God says, it was I who chose you. So God is leading you down a path and picks you to wake up at certain times. So you don't know you don't know when their shake-up is going to come for them to wake up. It's not your responsibility. Who are you focused on? You! In your heart and how you see the world. You're not out here like, well, he said he didn't do what he was supposed to do. Like, that has nothing to do with you. That's not what you're doing. That's not going to make you feel better. It's not going to help you when you get to the pearly gates, as they say. You're not going to get up there and be like, well, my neighbor, she stole. Ooh. And the lady down the street, she such a... No. How did you see the world? What did you do? Did you recognize perfection, or did you falsely label it? And then that reflects back to you. You are a law unto yourself. You are God made visible, having an experience. Didn't know he was Superman until he discovered, oh shit, I'm Superman. Then he could never go back. Or Spider-Man, same thing. Once he realized, oh my god, I can climb walls. You can't go back.
You can't go back to.
But you don't blame him before when he had no knowledge of it. You can't be mad at somebody for something. They've never heard that concept before. They've never heard you are God and your reality reflects you back to you. They'll be like, what are you talking about? I'm trying to get somebody to eat today.
Yeah.
So you forgive them. Like, they don't know. They legit don't know.
And forgive yourself for not knowing.
And forgive yourself, because once we go a level higher, you creating all of this, and you forgive yourself for creating this whole drama. And you accept responsibility for everything that comes into your reality, just as label perfect. And that's how you escape the matrix.
Wait, before you go, don't forget to send this to your friends and family. Click the like button and subscribe to the show. We have a lot more to hear from our guests. Each one of them will be back to share some more information and inspiring stories with us. So, stay tuned.